Hey guys, welcome back to Barrel Age Faith. My friend Michael Garton has rejoined us. How you been, Michael?
Pretty darn good, man. Blessed to
I
be here again. Yeah.
Always a pleasure to have you on. I think it's been like 9 months. I want to have you on way more, but it's been about 9 months when your book came out, Early Icons, hot
Yeah.
seller. Actually, it's getting referenced by people now. Like people just bring it up.
It is. It is. I've noticed some traction. Alex Soren, I'm thinking of you. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that I kind of saw a little bit what that this issue was going to be really determinative for people. It's going to be a really big deal for a long time. The question of early image veneration and the biblical basis for veneration of holy images. So I'm glad it's out there now because a lot of people are asking about this. So
Oh
yeah,
yeah, they are. It's a hot topic, and yeah, I just did a stream with Alex that's going to be released next week. But great guy, really fun. He released a video today, so definitely check it out.
good.
But today we're talking about literally, I mean, very similar kind of topic that Alex was talking about. And that is this this Twitter X sort of post by Gavin Ortlund, and then like many responses. And so we want to talk about his initial claim, and then talk about really the early church throughout this whole stream. That's kind of the goal.
Yep.
So it'll be a lot of fun. Any updates on the book? I mean, are you? Isn't there a part two coming out? Maybe part three down the road.
Yeah. Volume two, it's definitely still in the works. So what I did is uh all right. Are you able to bring up the sorry, Kyle?
Yeah, I can bring up the slides. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. So I ran a kind of pilot of volume two of early icons in this course that I taught through St. Athanasius College. It was a lot of fun to do. Basically, I did like 10 hours of mostly new material related to early image veneration. A lot of it really pushing image the evidence for image veneration back into the apostolic age more so than I've done before. Making a lot of new points. That yeah, I mean, some of it I've teased a little bit in the past, but a lot of this is going to be brand new. A lot of it is focused on more portrait icons, what we normally think of as icons, and how old they are, when they were venerated, the evidence for their veneration early on, and then also crucifixes, images of Christ crucified. So, in the first book, I focused more on symbolic images, things like the cross, altars, images on like seal rings, on signet rings, and stuff like that. I had a couple times where I talked about portraits with the catacombs, and where I talked about frescoes that are kind of like portraits, like the images at Dura Europos of Christ. Um, so it's not like I haven't touched on it before, but there's a lot more. There's a lot more. You can get basically,
Loaded, loaded, loaded. Yeah, I can't wait for it. Touching on some of that stuff tonight.
yeah,
So you guys are in for a treat. And really just even go on Twitter and or X and read some of his like you did, I don't know, you did like ten responses as a thread. I don't know how many it was, but it was excellent.
in the meantime, I'm also working on another book as kind of like a side project, and this one's going to specifically focus on that newly discovered early church from before the 300s, from before the time of Saint Constantine, the Megiddo Church in the Holy Land, and this is there's going to be some really interesting stuff in there that's related to my early icons project, but I'm going beyond it too. There's a lot of amazing stuff that you can kind of uncover as you start to dig into the Megiddo Church and like the archaeological finds related to it. But don't worry, Early Icons Volume 2, it's still work in progress as well. So I'm targeting early 2026 for the Megiddo book. Tentative title is House of God Jesus Christ, and if you're familiar with the mosaic, you'll know why I titled it that way, because it actually has that phrase, the name of Christ, the God Jesus Christ, is actually in the tiles of the mosaic. So, all right,
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Like you actually see him being called Theos
yeah,
directly, and it's Eucharistic, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But
yep,
but I love that double connection there, where you can't separate this claim of him being divine with also the church being Eucharistic and sacramental. They go together, so it's pretty cool.
yes, absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. All right, so
Michael Scott. You already know it's a fun night if Michael Scott shows up on a slide.
So those of you who know what specific scene this is from, you might be able to anticipate where this is going. But Gavin's known to be a good-humored guy who he's an office aficionado, like me and my wife are, and I guess Kyle's wife, but maybe not Kyle quite so much, right? Um,
I only know the old seasons. I don't know the second half of this, the later seasons that well.
right, right. But that's what I want to focus on is really giving a due response, like a response that actually is worthy of the challenge that Gavin laid out on the table. And so that challenge began in this way. He tweeted on September 26th, X'd. I don't know. I still call it tweet. Like, I don't care. He said the early church did not look Protestant. It also did not look Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. The early church looked like the early church: imperial, diverse, foreign, changing, harsh, beautiful, and profound. It is a tradition we all relate to, but no single church today owns. And one thing I noticed, Kyle, was that a lot of the responses to this, they focused in on the fact that Gavin does seem to be talking about appearances here. It doesn't seem like he's just talking about like doctrines or something, which is more what we tend to, go back and forth about between Protestants and Orthodox and Catholics. It tends to be a lot more focused on the doctrines, but this really did seem to be kind of directed towards appearances, towards just like what the church looked like or felt like. Um, and I mean, you saw some of the responses. Some people, they just like posted like pictures of the catacombs,
Yeah,
and
he
we're
got
just
I
like,
mean, it got flooded with
yeah,
early church imagery, catacombs, icons in a very sort of Twitter X sort of way. And I mean, really he's trying to be like an equalizer here, right? Like
yeah,
Protestants, Catholics, Orthodox, we're all the same. We've all have the same claims. Basically, it's all changed. None of us looks like the early church, and so of course Orthodox really makes a strong claim that we have the greatest continuity between the modern era and the early church, and that will, 500 years from now, we'll still have that title. That's really kind of
yeah.
the sense um, that the Orthodox Church claims. We're not as strong on like that Orthodox or that doctrine of development side, nor are we big into like, yeah, you can kind of change your ecclesiology for the moment. Um, no, we think that there's strong continuity. So I feel like that this tweet really targets us in a significant way. Yeah.
I agree. I agree. And I think that language of leveling really captures like what he's trying to do here. And it when a person does that, it puts them in an interesting spot because there's a kind of rhetorical advantage, the kind of ethos that they cultivate when they do this. It's a very like charitable ethos. It's like we're all in the same boat together. It kind of gives off this vibe of camaraderie. Like none of us can claim to be the early church. It's like, well, I don't know about that,
I mean,
Gavin. Yeah,
obviously, in some sense, that's true. It's like we're not the early church. Like it's 2025. Like there is a sense that this is true. But
yeah.
what he's trying to lead us into is thinking that like we've all changed it. We're all picking and choosing the fathers. We're all picking and choosing what we like or think that's best for the moment. And that's where it's the rubber meets the road, I would say.
Agreed, agreed. So his response to all of these, images of the catacombs with Christ presented in like, kind of like apse type position with people praying underneath and so forth. And there were tweets about doctrine as well, but a lot of it had to do with appearance, which I think that was the right way to read it. And his response kind of confirms that. Here's what he says. He thanks those who engaged. He says about half the disagreement came from Eastern Orthodox or other half Catholic. The Orthodox are extremely similar to others like Oriental Orthodoxy. This is telling. If you think the early church actually does look like just one church today, there simply is no clear winner. There's no way around this. And it's an intolerable burden to place on the private judgment of those discerning, given the alleged stakes of getting it wrong. So then, secondly, he says being Protestant means you can be honest with the messiness of church history. You don't have to cherry pick the data, whether pictures or much later frescoed or mosaicked interiors or quotes about later developed practice or theology. You can acknowledge the massive sea change of the 4th century, Constantine and Augustine, and how different the 2nd and 3rd centuries were. For Protestants, church history is a fascinating trail you can follow wherever it leads, not a yard you have to protect from intruders. Very rhetorically savvy. This is so rhetorically savvy. Just the analogies and stuff. Man, the broader need is a way to distinguish what is essential versus what is accidental in the church. For Protestants, what defines the church is simply the gospel of Jesus Christ expressed in word and sacrament. Other external structures of the church, important as they are not essential. This is why we see the church as subsisting in multiple institutions, and why we can recognize the true church in expressions that look as diverse as 2nd century Alexandria, 7th century Britain, 17th century India, or contemporary Nigeria. Churches in these places can look vastly different, but they are all one church because they all have the one and same Jesus. So, all right, Gavin. All right. Any comments you want to add before we jump into my response, Kyle?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I've got all sorts of things kind of running through my head. I mean, when you talk about like contemporary Nigeria, I mean, there's some pretty traditional churches in Nigeria. Both, I mean, there's a lot of Catholics and Anglicans there,
Yeah.
from my understanding. So, I mean, I don't know. There's just so much diversity going on here. I don't understand. I mean, it sounds nice on paper, but when you're actually looking at 7th century Britain, for example, I mean, I even just posted this about Ireland. In Gaelic, their word for Wednesday and Friday were fast days. Like that's
Yeah.
literally what Gaelic, like the Gaelic name for their Wednesday and Friday was first fast day and then second fast days. It's kind of like reminds me of hobbits, like first breakfast, second breakfast. They've got this like the apostolic teaching of the first century did okay, fast on Wednesdays and Fridays, and that's built into the Gaelic church. They remember this. So I guess we'd have to kind of go through all sorts of topics for me to kind of run through this sweep, but that's kind of the first thing is that we'd really have to kind of work through what he's actually saying here in real ways.
Yeah, and what's kind of being suggested versus like what the words are strictly saying. I think there's more that's being suggested by this. Obviously, it's the suggestion is Protestantism, a kind of there's not really a like visible criteria for an institution to be the church.
Right.
Even though
Yeah, I
strict,
mean, yeah. He's not like a high Anglican either. So depending on who I'm talking to, am I talking to Gavin, who's a Reformed Baptist, or am I talking to, Sean with Anglican aesthetics? It kind of is a moving target if I'm talking about just Protestants in general. So,
it's true.
by the way, I just met Sean in person at the Touchstone conference. He was there. We ran into each other. It's always funny. He's like barrel aged faith, and I'm like Anglican aesthetics. Isn't that weird? Like to call somebody by their channel name.
Oh
Uh,
no! Oh no!
and then somebody saw us. They're like, "Hey, look, it's the Orthodox guy and the Anglican guy like hanging out." Yeah, it was a fun time. But side note.
All right, Barrel Age Faith, you ready to move on?
Yeah, sorry. You don't wanna get me talking. We'll be
I'm
here
not
for 3
doing that.
hours.
Um, all right. So here was my response to him. I thanked him for bringing the issue to everyone's attention. Then I said, "You speak of honesty about church history, and rightly so. I think it is important, when being honest, to note substantive continuity where it is present. This includes some of the things which you characterize as external structures. What if these weren't viewed as just externals by the early church, but as a highly patterned and well-defined outflowing of her intrinsic character?" So notice how I'm trying to avoid saying that these are strictly speaking doctrines, or that there's literally only one way the church can look. I'm not saying either of those things. Nevertheless, I'm going to lay out a pattern and show that there's a lot of consistency, and that it seems to be a consistency based on kind of infusing meaning into materiality. So,
I like that. That's good.
yeah. And what if the difference between pre and post Constantinian, 300s AD, Christian material culture was like the difference between pre and post Constantinian Trinitarian theology? That is what I'd like to propose to Gavin and to viewers of this video. The theological substance remained the same the whole time, but the resources for explicating and unfolding that substance increased and became more varied. And so, in the same way that you can say that about the doctrine of the Trinity, it's the same teaching in the pre-Nicene Church and in the New Testament and the Old Testament. It's the same teaching as what is taught at Nicaea 1, 325 AD. It's the same teaching that Christ is of one essence with the Father. But was that a common phrase in the early church prior to that council? Actually, that phrase has a weird checkered history. It was used by some heretics, in fact. Its meaning had to be, frankly, kind of modified by Nicaea 1 as a way of upholding what was always taught. It's employing different language, a little bit of a shift in form in order to uphold the substance that has always been there. And so if you can do that, if you can do that with theology, can't you do that with art? Can't you do that with architecture? Can't you do that with liturgical objects as well? So that's basically what I'm putting out here. All right. So I'm ready. I'm ready. Here we go.
Here we
So
go.
my first example, I believe that I have 12 of these. I wanted to lead with one that's pretty intense and compelling, a little surprising. Uh, so actually, no, I've got to keep. I need to frame it a little bit more first. Okay, sorry. So I continued in the tweet. To avoid the problem where we cherry pick the data, whether pictures are much later frescoed or mosaicked interiors or quotes about later developed practice or theology. So here I'm quoting Gavin. So I'm saying I'm gonna answer you on this point. To avoid that problem, I present for your sincere consideration a thread of images and quotes from the first 300 years of Christianity and comparison to current Orthodox Church buildings and sacred objects. While not necessarily by itself deciding the issue in favor of the Orthodox Church versus Oriental, traditional Catholic, very high Anglican, very high Lutheran, while not necessarily deciding by itself the issue in favor of the Orthodox Church, I think it does point the open minded inquirer at least strongly in the direction of the oldest and most incarnational forms of Christianity. And so I'm not necessarily claiming that like this is like proof of orthodoxy. I'm trying to be a little more cautious here, but the point I'm trying to make is look, when you start digging in early Christian archaeology, when you look at early Christian art, it definitely looks more like the kind of stuff we see in Orthodoxy and other very high sacramental type forms of Christianity, but especially Orthodoxy. It looks more similar to that than to, shall we say, more low church, to use those unfortunate expressions, low church Protestant ways of presenting Christianity. All right, now I'm ready for my first example. All right, here we go. So the Chiborian, or Holy Canopy. So this is something that I don't think that a lot of people are aware of, because the photos available for Dura Europos online, they don't necessarily tell the whole story. So what I did is I obtained these images from the archaeological report by Carl Kraling. I saw these images first presented by this new up-and-coming scholar of early Christian art named Martin Stoll. So he had them in his, I believe it's his PhD thesis. And I saw this, and I had seen pictures of Dura Europos before, but mostly what you see when you look online is you see the reconstruction of Dura Europos at Yale University. Basically, they had to extract all of the frescoes that they were able to preserve, take them out of there from the Christian building, and put them in a place that's not war torn. So, boom, Yale University. You don't get quite the same sense of this was a sacred canopy above the baptismal font when you look at just that little picture online. So, if you look closely, there's these like stars that are like in the vault above. It looks like the pillars are meant to be kind of like tree trunk like almost in terms of the design on them. You have fruit that's like adorning the kind of outside of the arch.
Mm-hmm.
And then this four-cornered baptismal font. And obviously there would be water underneath. So, okay, so what's going on here?
Ancient cosmology.
Ancient cosmology. Exactly. So you have the vault of the heavens, of which God is the fashioner. You have the sky presented in the phenomenological category of a dome. This is obviously just, I'm basically doing straight Jonathan Peugeot here, guys. So,
Right. I was like, yeah, Michael's become Peugeot. You guys need to do an interview. I should set you guys up somehow. I just met Peugeot and hung out with them at a bonfire a couple nights. Well, there was no fire. It was just back patio stuff. But you
yeah,
two would get along. Yeah, that's great.
there's no question that a lot of the way that I've argued for things in early icons, it actually derives from some of the stuff that I picked up on him years ago. Because I mean, basically he just, part of what he does to people is he just says like, well, just like look at what's in front of you. Just
Yeah.
look at what's in front of you and extract the meaning. Compare what you see to what you experience. Um, and when you do that, like it does become like pretty clear, I think. This is an image of the meeting of heaven and earth. This is presenting a point of union between the heaven, between the heavens and the earth. Even the four-cornered aspect, that's a common way of like describing the earth. The earth appears flat to us. We have, a four-directional compass even today. The flatness of the earth is kind of more fundamental in a certain sense than its roundness, because in order to even be able to come to the conclusion that it's round, you have to live in this world as though it's flat for a really long time. So there's something more fundamental about this experience of the earth as, flat and four-cornered. So you see that going on here at the baptismal font. There's no question that this is meant to echo the cosmological symbolism of the tabernacle and the temple too. It's a sacred canopy, for goodness sake. So you have the stars above, you have the earth, and then you have the waters beneath the earth going on here as well. So you have those bitter waters that are below, which also are receiving from heaven the healthful, the life-giving water that's above at the same time. And Kyle, I mean, I think you're probably aware of this too, that that there's probably a combination of both pouring and immersion that would be going on in early Christian baptismal ritual that encompasses both the experience of receiving the life-giving Holy Spirit from above. In the Gospel according to St. John, I mean, Jesus calls the Holy Spirit, that living water. That's the living water that he gives, is the Holy Spirit. So it's that, plus it's also dying. It's going down. It's being buried. It's descent into Hades with Christ. And that's how the early church viewed this. So you see that theology very consistently and basically everywhere in every early Christian author. No disagreements from any of them. This is therefore an embodiment of that theology. So when you go and you look at modern Orthodox churches, it's not uniform. It's not every single one of them, but a lot of them have ciboriums still. And as you can see, they look really similar. They look very similar to what we have at Dura in the early 200s AD. And by the way, please watch the video that I did, about 9 months ago on this channel about Dura Europos. I lay out why we know, for instance, that it's not a later, like post-Nicaea church or something like that. And I talk more about the iconography there. There's a lot of stuff to it. The images are meant to be interactive. I'll touch on it a little bit today, but yeah. Kyle,
Yeah, that
anything
was
you want?
great. That was a great fun time when you went through all that. Yeah, that was good.
That was good. Anything you want to add about this?
Yeah, I mean, I love it when I discover churches that have this. I mean, I would find it in Catholic churches as well, and it adds quite the dignity to the altar, because you wouldn't always see, like a rood screen that you might see in England, but this functioned as a type of veil, or a type of protection, or designating the space. Uh, so it's wonderful to see this. You do see some churches restoring these things, so
Yep.
it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I think one important thing to note about what we're talking about tonight is that, I mean, any Protestant church can just build these things and put them in their church. I think one of the claims that's being made tonight is that Orthodoxy remembers. It remembers tradition. It remembers what's handed on, and it's not like we go through phases of getting rid of these things and then in a drastic way and then bringing them back. So if you're faithful on the small and medium things, that means when you're debating larger matters, there is a kind of integrity going on there, a type of faithfulness that we remember. Peugeot even kind of talked about this when chaos rolls through, particularly our culture, right? And destroys everything. And we're seeing everything in our culture at every level being destroyed. But his talk was actually quite hopeful. That's when we have to remember, like a whole civilization built along a river. Let's say a flood comes through and destroys it all. The only thing they have left is their memory. But if they can remember it, they can rebuild all of these exact patterns. So even if orthodoxy gets destroyed in a way by communism or atheism or all these things, we can still remember this is the pattern. So I think that's one of the most powerful points that you're making in your presentation.
Yep, absolutely. Um, and so this is a point of continuity. This is a strong point of continuity. And even if you take this basic form and then you notice that it can be expanded into the actual building of the church, it helps us to see like this is pretty universal. This is a very strong, strong architectural feature. It's very consistent throughout Holy Orthodoxy and all churches that derive some kind of patrimony from the pre-Nicene era and from the early Byzantine era as well. Like, yeah, like you said, Catholics can do this too. Anglicans, a lot of their older churches can be like this. And even some Lutherans and stuff can have something like this as the structure of their church building, even. The sacred canopy above, the dome, the vault of the heavens, and then the four-cornered stable earth that God has established beneath. And I think putting it above either a baptismal font, as is the case at Dura, or above an altar, as is the case more commonly at modern Orthodox churches, it expresses this awareness of the overshadowing of the Holy Spirit, that He is the covering, that He is the one who protects us and nurtures us and brings forth life. He broods over the waters of creation. He's brooding over the baptismal waters.
Mm.
So that covering aspect of as a symbol of the Holy Spirit's presence. All right, man, we could talk about each of these for like forever, but
Yeah, we got to rock and roll here. Yeah,
yeah.
gotta get going.
So my second one was related to objects on the altar, and so I gave this quote from the trial before Xenophilius. So this records the confiscation of numerous liturgical objects at Numidia, North Africa, in 303 AD during the Diocletian persecution. That's a quote from James Hadley. He is this guy is a really phenomenal scholar of early Christian material culture. Read his article, Early Christian Perceptions of Sacred Space. It'll change your mind about a lot of things. But here's some of the liturgical objects it mentions. 2 golden chalices, also 6 silver chalices, 6 silver pots, a silver chafing vessel, 7 silver lamps, 2 torches, 7 short brass candlesticks with their lamps, and so on and so forth. I will also note that he mentions veils. There's veils, and then there's also garments. So, all right. So first of all, there's a lot more going on here than just like an inventory taken by Diocletian's agents or something like that. When you start thinking about what the kinds of materials are here, what the kinds of objects, and even the number of them, stuff starts to just like pop out in weird ways. So first of all, notice that the chalices are all made out of gold or silver. So this is significant because gold and silver are considered to be part of the category of honorable materials. You see this understanding of sacred materiality and a distinction between honorable material and common material. You see this in pre-Nicene Christian texts. Clement of Alexandria has it. Origen has it. When he talks about the imperial image and the importance of showing respect to the image of the emperor, Origen talks about you respect the image of the emperor, even if it's made of the common stuff. St. Methodius of Olympus has this distinction between honorable material, common material, and it's in the martyrdom of Polycarp as well, because his bones and his flesh get described as pure gold, refined more than as can be done by a refiner's fire. His remains are taken up as silver and precious gold. His body smells like honorable spices, honorable incense. So this idea of there being a hierarchy of materials that maps onto like you make certain things out of certain materials because they're considered more sacred or more honored. That's what's going on here.
And they're not corruptible. Like gold is incorruptible. And so if you have the incorruptible precious blood of Christ, then it's fitting that that should be an incorruptible metal versus, I mean, as
Right.
a Baptist, I had a little plastic cup,
Right.
Classic.
There has to be a match between the inner and the outer. There has to be a match between the container and its contents. And as a result of that match that has to happen, where there has to be something about the cup that somehow matches or images or mirrors the fact that it's Christ who's within it. As a result of that, there's a metonymy, there's a kind of interchangeability that happens in early Christian texts and even in the scriptures, where sometimes cup just stands in, it takes the place of blood or wine. So St. Paul in 1 Corinthians, he asks the question, the cup of blessing which we bless, is it not a participation in the blood of Christ? Oh, the cup? Wait, what are you talking about? What cup? I don't know. What's that talking about? Notice there's this kind of exchange that's going on where cup can be used to refer to the contents. The contents in the cup have this kind of intrinsic union with each other. They have to match. And if the contents are sacred, then the cup is sacred. You see the same thing in the Didache. It begins the section about the Eucharist concerning the cup. And then as it proceeds through, it says, don't give out your Eucharist too hastily, to people that aren't baptized, closed communion. So again, sacredness of the materiality. And then it says that this is an interpretation, application of the Christ's instruction to not give what is holy to dogs.
Right.
So you have, on the one hand, bread as one of the elements, and then cup as the other. And together they're the Eucharist, and they're called that which is holy. So there has to be some understanding already in the first century in the Didache and in the scriptures of this sacred materiality, that the container is holy if its contents are holy, and the container must match the contents. You see this play out more in Tertullian when he talks about chalices with the image of Christ as Good Shepherd in early icons. I argue that that's part of a common Greco-Roman and just ancient practice, where if you have a ritual drinking vessel, you put an image of the one who is being honored on it, whether that's a human ruler or a divine ruler. And to put the image of Christ as Good Shepherd on it means you're basically saying, I'm honoring you through the rituals done with this cup. It's veneration.
Yeah.
The cup, the image on the cup is functioning as kind of like an icon, as like a window to heaven. And so notice again, there has to be this match between the contents and the container. And so I think that's what we're seeing here with the gold. Incorruptibility, immortality, the fact that the body and blood of Christ is imperishable and that gold symbolizes that. Yeah.
Does this text also mention sort of like, if my memory serves me correctly, or maybe it's a different text that I'm thinking of, it also mentions minor orders like subdeacons and readers and those who are collecting, like the reader has this, the subdeacon has this, the deacon has this, and so you actually hear about minor orders.
You do, and some of the deacons or subdeacons or whoever it is, or the readers, they're like refusing to give up copies of the scriptures as well, which just it goes further into the sacred materiality thing. They eventually hand them over, I believe, but they're reticent to do so. They kind of hide the scriptures. Why? Well, because they think their Bibles are sacred, because they think their Bibles are like icons, that the honor, the ceremonial handling, the reverential treatment given to the scriptures will pass through to the word of God himself. So yeah, no, absolutely. One more point I'll make about this one, just real quick, is notice the number of lamps, the 7 silver lamps. 7 of something is often connected to a menorah. And so obviously this menorah is a 7-branched candle stand. I think that that's the best way of reading this. And so lo and behold, Orthodox altars today, there's that 7-branch lampstand. It's a lampstand that gets talked about by St. Irenaeus, by Clement of Alexandria, by other early Christian authors as an icon. Clement views it as an icon of the cross and ultimately of Christ. St. Irenaeus speaks of it in very high terms as well, though exactly what he says I don't recall off the top of my head. But I know Clement basically has an iconographic view of the lampstand. So there's this common thread all the way through Old Testament, New Testament, early church, post-Constantinian church, Orthodoxy today, common thread of sacred materiality, holy objects on the altar. All right. So my third one is just images of Christ in high up places, ceiling type places. And so Here's two examples I gave. Um, these are both from the catacombs of Marcellinus and Peter. And one of them, the date could be pre-Nicene, like kind of barely pre-Nicene. It might also be from a little bit later. No worries, not a big deal. If it ends up being a little bit later, well, then it was still probably made by people that were alive in the pre-Nicene era. You have to take these kinds of things into account. You can't just say that like this stuff is like invented whole cloth because it was made in 350 AD. Well, it was made by people that were alive before 325. So you know,
Yeah.
it's not so easy to draw lines in that manner.
And
But
these patterns are
regardless,
not popping out of nowhere either. There's a history behind these patterns even before that in a Christian sense.
and if you read scholars of the catacombs, which by the way, I think it's important for people to, it is important to reference scholarship, to interact with it, to not just kind of, just kind of come up with stuff or like guess at stuff. It can be a helpful reference point when you're trying to come up with dates for things. I'm not saying scholars are always right, but it's a good jumping off point at least. When you read catacomb scholars, they do acknowledge that, for instance, the catacombs of Calixtus, which they're not pictured here, but they have images of Christ as Good Shepherd in the kind of like the apse-like position, the arcosolium. Um, uh, so it's not. And to clarify, the catacombs of Calixtus are either early 200s, like it maybe started being built in like 205 AD, or may even be like late 100s, depending on who you ask. So um, this stuff, it has a history further back even than the images that I'm showing here. Okay, but in terms of these, I think there's no question. There's like a very a very strong and noticeable connection between presenting Christ as teacher in this kind of apse-like position and modern Orthodox portrayals of Christ in the dome. Um, why is he in the highest spot? Also, why is he gesturing towards you? Um, and so the way that Martin Stoll interprets that image on the left there from Cubiculum 54, he basically says, look, the gestures that Christ is portrayed as making in images like this, they're addressed to you, the viewer. That's why he's facing outward. Um, and if you really start to tease out what that means, then of course it means that this is functioning as a window to heaven. It's functioning as a conduit for prayer. It's functioning as a means to receive blessing from Christ. You receive blessing from Christ through looking at the image. He blesses you through it. He gives you his teaching through it. He's teaching you when you look at it. Um, he's bestowing grace, the grace of wisdom on you. And so Martin Stoll says that images like these, the Good Shepherd in Cubiculum 21, or Christ the Teacher in Cubiculum 54, they are, in his words, quote, a theophany to the viewer. So there you go, that idea of a window to heaven, Christ manifesting through the image.
Mm.
You can say something pretty similar about the image of Christ as Good Shepherd in the arch behind the Chiborum in Dura Europos, behind the baptismal font. But I've talked about that at a lot of length elsewhere, so I'm not gonna go into it too much here. But just note, we've still got apses, which are a kind of more advanced adaptation of this to this day. The image on the right is from Saint Sava Orthodox Cathedral, and I think it's in Belgrade in Serbia. But it's new. It was finished construction, I believe, within the past like 5 years. We still have this form of Christ in this kind of dome-like or half arch, half sky, heaven type shape, blessing us. We still have that today. Uh,
Awesome.
a
Very
theophany to
true.
the viewer. Yeah. Number 4, altar with arch. So the Megiddo Church, the way that I have noticed people sometimes framing this archaeological find is that it's this kind of quaint, doesn't look very much like later Christian stuff, early find that almost kind of has affinities of certain things from Protestantism and a more low church way of looking at things. Maybe some women's ordination mixed in there too. You sort of get this vibe from people that talk about it, including the people that hosted it at the Museum of the Bible. When you listen to them talking about it, you're kind of like, you guys kind of think that this thing's all just evangelical, like Uh, I don't think so, guys. I don't think so. And so, what's sometimes not known about this is that in addition to there being these beautiful mosaics on the floor, and in addition to there being an altar close by, which has a very telling inscription related to it in the floor, there was this arch-like shape above that altar as well. And the remains of the building indicate that this is the case. There are two pilasters. They're not columns exactly, but they're kind of a column that's like built into the wall that you see on each end of the altar holding up this arch. Sorry, on each end of the floor opposite the altar, the sides, it's holding up this arch basically.
Mm-hmm.
That is the same kind of pattern we saw at Dura with the Chiborum. It's the four-cornered earth below and the sacred vault of the heavens above. And then the altar then would function here as that midpoint, as that point of union. And of course, in offering up the Eucharist on this, as you're raising up the elements, as you're exalting them, this is basically acknowledging that God's blessing comes down from that vault, from that above, from the arch above. So yeah, the same kind of pattern of sacred architecture. I think you can see it here in the Megiddo Church. There's more to it than just those mosaics, beautiful as they are. And then we've got the same kind of pattern in Orthodoxy today, altars with arches above them. And again, it's pointing to the altar as this union point between heaven and earth. It's an elevated space. It's the mountain of God set on the earth, four-cornered earth below, the mountain of God where we meet him and where we offer sacrifice to him. My fifth, this is another thing that it's not very widely known about. It's hard to get good pictures that are related to it if you do like a Google image search or something like that. This is the Vestigium of Constantine. So this does not survive today. There's a possibility that the church where this was originally housed still has some element of this present, but certainly the images up above, they're not there. They're not there. So how do we know about it? The Liber Pontificalis, the book of the Roman pontiffs, records a donation made by St. Constantine the Great to the Church of Rome. And the details are frankly kind of shocking. So this would have had to have been made around the year 313 AD. It's a pre-Nicene thing. The images embedded into this partition, this vestigium, and a vestigium is normally kind of like it's kind of like this sort of triangular shaped frame type thing supported by columns. It's often the end of like a Roman building. It could be like the kind of front end, the outside end of like a Greek or Roman temple or whatever. And you could have your image of like a god up there or an emperor or whatever. But this vestigium, the images contained in it are as follows. There's 13 images that face outwards towards the congregation, the 12 apostles and Christ as teacher. And they're composed out of silver. There's 5 images that face inward towards the altar. There's Christ in the center again, and 4 angels, all composed out of silver. So these are probably single cast, images that would have been basically made out of one material. It's possible that they were freestanding sculpture. It's also possible that they were reliefs that were embedded into like a wall that's, in the vestigium. We don't know exactly, but regardless.
Yeah, when you study art history or church history, you see all those kinds of different examples. Yeah.
But I don't think there's any question that like when you look at this, it does make you think a little bit of the iconostasis, like this idea of a sacred partition that has these images of holy figures, revered figures, on it, and the structure even is similar, and we're still seeing that the four-cornered aspect, the sacred dome, all of that seems to be here as well in this early structure that was donated by St. Constantine to the Church of Rome. It really does seem to work as a kind of prototype, a distant prototype of the iconostasis.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you have all these kind of, like, early forms, like the Templon, rail. I mean, there's all different kinds of forms separating these spaces. I've never really studied this one. This is all new to me, really. I haven't dug into this. This is pretty cool.
And I think that there's a good argument that can be made for a connection between these images and um, some of the statements made by Saint Methodius of Olympus in his discourse on the resurrection, where he talks about images of God's angels made out of gold. There seems to be this idea of honorable materials that you use to make images of Christ, the apostles, or angels, and these may be the first images of angels um, made of like a kind of you know made in a kind of relief or sculpture type style that Christianity ever had. Or
Mhm.
we don't know that for sure. It could have been that there were prototypes earlier, but a lot of the images of angels from the catacombs, they definitely don't draw attention to the angels in the same way. They're more presented in like human form and stuff like that. So this is a fascinating precedent, an early precedent for a holy partition with holy images on it. Number 6. So now talking about the Megiddo mosaic and looking at the floor. Those who have looked into this will be kind of familiar that there's this design with fish, and there's these geometrical patterns that surround them. Now, there's a lot of meaning to the ichthus. Obviously, one of the most well-known aspects of this is that it's an acronym for Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior. That the Greek words for the Greek letters that begin those words form the Greek word fish, ichthus. So uh, there's definitely this sense as you're looking at this that they've intentionally selected fish for some reason. Like they're trying to play off of that trope, uh, that common artistic form that shows up in catacombs. It shows up in um, well, I mean, it also shows up on early Christian engraved gems that present, like two fish in the center or two fish with an anchor in the center that appears to have like the form of the cross. So this is a common stylistic trope. This is a common symbol in early Christianity. Clement of Alexandria is the first one to comment on the image itself. So he describes Christian seal rings having the ichthus on it. And then in the same work, in the Logos Pedagogos, he talks about what a fish symbolizes, how the eye of the fish symbolizes the logos, and then the body of the fish symbolizes the flesh. So there's an incarnational aspect even to the image of the ichthus. So why two fish? And why did I say interactive or participatory floor mosaic? Like, why didn't I just say floor mosaic? Well, I think that there's something going on here with the fact that there's the two fish right there, and the altar, you can see it kind of immediately behind. You can see the base of it. Um, when Christ
So you're
multiplied,
saying this mosaic is at the foot of basically the altar at the
right,
Megiddo church, yeah.
and when Christ multiplied the loaves, there were two fish, and so on the altar, the bread would be broken and distributed, um, and the two fish are in the presence of that. This seems to be one of those cases that we see appear in the catacombs and other floor mosaics, like the Church of the Multiplication in Tagba in the Holy Land as well, where there's sometimes there's something like missing, a missing element from an image, and the ritual activity of Christians kind of provides that missing element and allows the image to be a participation in like a biblical story. In the catacombs, sometimes you'll see like 5 wise virgins and 6 foolish virgins, and then an image of the person who is buried. And the idea is, well, why are there only 5 wise virgins? Well, by your prayers, you pray for the person that's buried there so that they become number 6. They become the 6th wise virgin. At the Church of the Multiplication in Tagba, there's the 2 fish pictured on a floor mosaic. There's a basket of loaves of bread, 4 loaves, not 5 loaves. Why? Well, it has to be that the 5th loaf is that which is offered up on the altar. It has to be that the 5th loaf is the Eucharist. And that by offering up the Eucharist, you bring to completion the biblical story that's enacted in the Mosaic. This is the understanding of Michael Peppard in his. He's a great scholar of the of Dura Europos in particular, and has a great article on early Christian art and ritual that lays out these claims in relation to Togba. And I would argue that's what's going on here with Megiddo as well. That has to be what's going on here too. So it's more than just decoration. It's more than just decoration. Was it venerated? I would say not exactly. Not exactly. But when we get to my quote from Origen that I'm going to reference, I'll kind of talk about that a little.
Okay.
So here's my number 7. So there's this image at Dura Europos that's sometimes interpreted as being the woman at the well. There's a woman drawing water from a well. However, typically in iconography of the woman at the well, Christ is there speaking to her. There's something significant about the fact that this woman is alone. There's something significant also about the fact that if you look real close, there's this kind of starburst on her chest. So I laid out some of the arguments for this in my Dura Europos video that we did, Kyle, but basically I think that this is an image of Mary. It's based on the Proto-Evangelium of James, where the Annunciation begins at a well and ends inside her house. And that you see even in later Orthodox iconography, a continual interest in portraying things according to the traditions that were contained in the Proto-Evangelium, where, yeah, you show it, the Annunciation beginning at a well. Also, look at that nice Chiborum in that Orthodox fresco over there. You see? Yeah, they're everywhere. They're everywhere.
There it is, yeah.
Yeah. So I won't go much further into this, but there's a lot to be said about this image of Mary in particular. There's lots of reasons for thinking that it is her, and great, amazing continuity with the way the Orthodox Church has continued to honor her through images of her. So my number 8. So now this is the Origen quote that I was mentioning earlier. I talk about this one a lot in early icons. So this is from his homilies on Joshua. And he gives this kind of allegorical interpretation, as is his wont. He gives this allegorical interpretation of certain elements in the narrative of Joshua, the Gibeonites in particular. He basically says that they kind of symbolize lax, kind of lazy Christians today who don't really have an inward change. He basically says they do these kind of outward acts of reverence, just like the Gibeonites served. They served the Israelites in the things pertaining to the altar and the congregation. But did they have an inward change? No, they were kind of deceitful or whatever. They didn't actually, or at least initially, they didn't have that inward change. And so Origen says, if there are any such persons among us whose faith is characterized only by this, that they come to church and bow their heads to the priests, exhibit courtesy, honor the servants of God, even bring something for the decoration of the altar or church, yet they exhibit no inclination to also improve their habits and correct their impulses. Those who are like this, let them know they will be assigned a part in the law with the Gibeonites by the Lord Jesus. Now, pretty obviously here, there's several modes of veneration that are being mentioned in this commentary on Joshua. And these are being done in church. And we still do some of these today. We still bow to the clergy. And this connects to the way that St. Ignatius of Antioch and the Didache talk about obeying the bishop as the Lord himself, or honoring the one who serves the Lord for you as though he is an image of the Lord. That's kind of what we're doing. We're treating the clergy as icons of Christ. We're treating them as icons of Christ. The veneration we give to them, it really goes to him. We're honoring him by how we interact with them. And then, this idea of adornment, that one way of showing honor to someone is by adorning something that's a representation of them. You show honor to them by the way that you interact with something that symbolizes them in some way. So St. John of I don't think it's St. John of Damascus. I think it's St. Leontius of Byzantium. He talks about how one way of expressing veneration, one instance of veneration is if someone takes the shirt of a loved one who passed away and cries into it. That's an example of veneration. When you're interacting with something that symbolizes a person and you do some kind of honorific action towards it, really you're not crying over the shirt. Like, come on, let's be real. You're crying over the person that the shirt represents.
Right.
The same thing is going on with altars and with the church building itself in origin. That's what he's saying. When you adorn it, when you adorn the altar, what are you really doing? You're honoring the heavenly altar on which Christ offers himself up. What are you doing when you adorn the church? You're honoring the divine council. You're honoring the throne room of God. And therefore, ultimately, of course, you're honoring God himself. And I think that this helps us to understand that, yeah, maybe, yeah, it's not strictly speaking correct to say that like the ichthus on the floor at the Megiddo church would be venerated, but that is part of a larger image, namely a church. The churches themselves are these images. They are a symbol of the throne room of God, the holy altar in heaven, and ultimately of Christ himself. And so to do these actions, do honorific actions somehow directed towards the church building, it actually passes to Christ because it's a symbol of him. It's a symbol of him.
Like the church itself, like the building itself is like an icon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that was a big point for me to really kind of pick up on, as a Protestant, you grow up hearing like it's the people that are church, the people are the church, not the building. And of course that's true. We're the
Yeah.
ecclesia.
Yeah.
But in the Orthodox mindset, the temple, the church itself actually functions as a kind of icon where we are like the people within the icon. And
Yep.
so it's like functioning and with an orientation and within a cosmology. Um, and so once you kind of can pick up on that and the sacraments are celebrated there, it gives where you worship great meaning and great depth. It doesn't just seem like some piece of Tupperware or something that you can just throw
Yeah.
away or renovate on a whim.
And the way that I would lay it out is by means of clothing. The church is the body of Christ. So is it fundamentally just people? I would say it's even more fundamentally, it's the body of Christ. Of course, it's made up of people that have been incorporated in. They've become body parts, but it's fundamentally the body of Christ. Well, bodies, they generally get clothing. You put clothing on them that matches the character of the body. So that's kind of what the church building is. It's clothing for the body that's there. The body that's there by means of the people that enter it and congregate there. And I think you can push the connection between body and clothing very far because like imagine you're walking down the street and you see your friend and you're like, "Hey, that's, Toby or whatever," to bring an office reference into it. That's Toby, and you point at his shirt. If Toby turned around to you and was like, "That's not me, that's my shirt." We'd laugh about it. It doesn't make any sense. When you point to someone's clothes, you're pointing to them. To indicate the clothing is to indicate the body. There's a kind of union between the two that happens. Clothes become a kind of extension of the body. And so in the same way, the church building becomes an extension of the living body of Christ.
Yeah, we're wearing symbolism and we're wearing what we value and what we believe in many ways.
Yep.
It's hard to explain that to a teenager, but you try. I
Yeah.
have kids entering the teenage years, so you,
Yeah, man.
but that's a whole other conversation. I do want to mention a super chat real quick so I don't forget. Thank you, Taylor, for this great gift. One of my favorite YouTube channels. Thank you for all the work you do. I plan on getting your book, Mr. Garton. Good, great book, guys. I'm also a catechumen for 2 months now in Orthodox Church. Praise God. That is amazing. Taylor, thanks for the gift. And it's great to have you joining us tonight. Pray for us that we would really appreciate that. We have I always joke when people call me an ortho bro. I'm like I'm an ortho dad. I've got 7 kids. Michael's got kids. We're ortho dads. We we're here to bring many families along.
I actually like your follow-up that you do sometimes, Kyle, where you're like, "I'm an ortho hobbit." That one always gets you. I'm like, "That's it. That's where it is." Yeah.
Yeah, Amy is Kyle Michael Scott. This is great. I've actually people have said this about me before. Uh, I you know what my wife likes Michael Scott, so I'm okay. She likes his when he's all silver and gray looking, she's like, "That's what it's gonna be you when you're an old guy." I'm like, "Okay, well, if you like it, then I'm already"
That's funny, man.
Cleve, thanks for joining us. Cleve Antiquities here. Ben, thanks for joining us
Oh,
tonight. Great to see you tonight too, man.
cool, cool.
Yeah.
So my number 9 was, the a procession of the myrrh-bearing women that's portrayed at Dura. And so couple things to note here. First of all, the position of this fresco in relation to the baptismal font is considered to be really significant. You have basically a processing towards Christ's tomb, which if the characters in the image kept going, they would go to the baptismal font, basically. So there seems to be something going on here with the movement of the catechumen towards the baptismal font. There's a kind of mirroring between the ritual activity that's done in the space and the art. And I mean, if baptism is descent into Hades with Christ, if it's dying and rising with him, then yeah, I mean, there's something deeply participatory about this image. You are joining yourself to these women as you process towards the baptismal font to die with Christ. And so this understanding of the iconography here, it's you see it in Michael Peppard in his book, The World's Oldest Church, that it's haptic iconography. It's not primarily optic to be viewed. It is, but even more so, it's haptic. It's meant to be interacted with through movement. Um, Notice the outward facing poses of the women. Notice the fact that this is typical in portrait iconography in the Orthodox Church today. The images we venerate, they face the person who's in the image is depicted as facing outwards towards us precisely so that we can address them, so that we can honor them. Um, there's a connection here between the way that there's a 3/4 turn of the figures towards us that's connected to how we're supposed to interact with these images. Um, you are meant to process towards these images in unison with the women. You interact with the women through the image. Um, and lo and behold, we've got later Orthodox iconography that has many of the same features. Um, so you have the tomb, you have an angel sitting on the tomb. Notice the like starburst that's in the upper left corner there at Dura. Martin Stoll suggests that could very well be a way of presenting the angels. There's two of those starbursts on the tomb, by the way. So it kind of seems like that's what's going on here. Um,
Wow.
you have the women carrying lamps in both. You have them with the kind of like lamp outward facing, and in their arm. And you have obviously the tomb itself. They're carrying spices as well. You can see these kind of bowls that the women at Dura are holding, and that the women in the icon on the right are holding as well. There's no question that there's development of a kind that goes on here. Obviously, you don't see the angel pictured per se with wings and a halo, but the fundamental elements are all basically there. They just haven't been kind of unfolded as much as they possibly could be. They haven't been elaborated in the same way that we see nowadays, but it's the same stuff. It's the same basic iconographical elements.
Mhm.
So yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's so cool. There's this tradition that just carries on for, 1,000 years or 1,500 years, depending on when that one was depicted. Uh, I like your connection with the procession and connecting the tomb with Hades and baptism. The chaos, the water, the dragons. You see this in the icons of even the our Lord's baptism, where you see all those kinds of creatures being destroyed and defeated. So
yep,
it's a lot of cool imagery going on there.
yep, absolutely, absolutely. My number 10 was related to that. Actually, it's Christ walking on the water and reaching out to Peter. So Dura has multiple images of Christ. He's only presented as Good Shepherd in the area behind the baptismal font, but there's more kind of like almost looks kind of like later Byzantine iconography type images of Jesus, where he's got the uh, I think it would be called the Palladium, that specific style of dress. He's making these gestures. Notice, he's got that outreached arm. A lot of those elements that you typically think of as like, oh, that took a long time to develop. That's like late 300s, 400s before they start picturing Christ like that. Nope, it's there in the 200s. It's there in the
Yeah.
early 200s. Um, even, I mean, I actually get a little surprised when I look at the boat that the apostles are in at Dura. And then I look at the boat in this later Orthodox icon. I'm like, that actually looks like the same boat, kind of like there's so much resonance. There's so much similarity, so much carryover, just so much. I don't know. What should we call it, Kyle? Should we call it tradition? Maybe that's the right
Yes.
thing to call it.
Yes. What is handed on? What is when somebody gives you something that's treasure, you don't just forget about it. And it's easy for us to devalue tradition in today's, the 21st century. It's just we have become such a non-traditional people. Like we don't even pass on furniture, we don't pass on this and that. But you go and study throughout, history in really traditional cultures, they do remember what was given to them for like hundreds and hundreds or if not thousands of years. And scholars are becoming more and more aware of this. The less skeptical they become.
Yeah, it's true. One thing I'll note about the image at Dura is it does portray Peter in a little bit of a different pose than in later Orthodox iconography. Our later iconography tends to more emphasize Peter as the sinking one who has a little bit of trouble in his faith, but here we're more seeing Christ um, uh, upholding Peter and Peter being able to participate in Christ's mastery of chaos, his mastery of the chaotic waters. I mean, both are true. It's just kind of emphasizing two different aspects of the same gospel story. But I think that I think that this is I think these images, when I look at them, it definitely just makes me think that like as modern people, we need to reclaim even addressing Christ in prayer according to the kinds of actions he does in the gospels, like asking him to save us as he saved Peter from the waters of chaos, or as he stilled the storm. We should be asking, we should be reaching out to Christ in prayer and asking him to save us in the same manner that he saved um, people in the New Testament and in the Old. And that's a common theme in early Christian hymnography and prayers, is just addressing Christ according to the mode in which he revealed himself, according to actions he did. I think a lot of our pre-communion prayers do this really just beautifully. Like we describe ourselves as like the sinful woman and the woman with the issue of blood. We describe ourselves as Judas and as Peter as we approach him, and we ask him to be merciful to us in the same manner in which he was merciful to those people. And I think that that helps us to live in the scriptural story, to really be embodied in that story, and to see a continuity of mercy from God, from all ages past to the present. So, anyways,
The
just
pre-communion prayers are awesome. I mean, they're just so rich. They're some of my favorite
yeah.
prayers. Yeah.
All right, my number 11 is Christ healing the paralytic. This one's right next to the image of Christ uh, allowing Peter to come out and walk upon the waves with him. Um, if you see that red background there, that's because this is the image as it still exists today, housed in the Yale University
Mm.
art gallery. So this image and the one that you just saw of Christ walking on the water, they're on the wall there. Um, Lots of similarities between the Dura Europa's presentation of Christ healing the paralytic and modern Orthodox iconography. Really, the only difference that I see is just left to right, right to left. Like it's basically the same image. You've got the man lying down. It even looks kind of similar, him being kind of wrapped up. He's carrying, his four-cornered cot, and Christ is pronouncing blessing with a gesture. So bringing it back to that quote that I gave from Martin Stoll earlier, that early Christian frescoes, when you see Christ facing outwards, and again, notice that Dura iconography, it's the three-quarter turn of the person who's pictured outwards towards the viewer partially. It's addressing you. You have Christ addressing that blessing, and like Martin Stoll says, when you see those gestures addressed by an outward-facing figure, it's being addressed to you as the viewer. It's being addressed to you. It connects to the baptism as well, because baptism is our resurrection, and this is something that is a prototype of the resurrection, the anastasis, the no longer sitting, the standing up of the paralyzed man. It's a prototype of Christ's resurrectional grace. So, yeah, it makes sense that it would be in the iconography at Dura. You would be experiencing what is represented there, in the presence of this image, while
Mhm.
praying to the one who does the action pictured. So, yeah, yeah.
'Cause you're being baptized in that area. Yeah,
And you're
experiencing
being
resurrection. Yeah.
literally raised up out of the font. Yeah, the whole thing. Yeah.
Mhm.
My last one is portrait type images of Jesus and Mary. And so, again, I think it's good and important to tap into scholarship when it comes to the dates for images. It's a good jumping off point. Maybe the scholars are wrong. Maybe this image is even older than it says, but at the very least, it provides like kind of a bar. But this is the catacombs of Priscilla in Rome. Um, Fabrizio Visconti, the catacomb scholar, dates this image to the fourth decade of the 200s, so first half of the 200s AD. And he notes that there's other iconography related to the Nativity that begins to develop around this time that comes maybe slightly before it. Presentations of the wise men bringing gifts to Christ and so forth. It's not pictured in this image, but there's a representation of a prophet on the left-hand side. You kind of see his hand there a little bit. He's pointing to a star that's above Christ and the Theotokos. And so this is either reference to, I think, Isaiah or the prophet Balaam. Either way, there's a use of the star of the nativity of Christ as a divine sign that was prophesied beforehand. The whole logic of the image, if you think about it, with this pointing towards a star, and then the star itself is a sign, and then Mary is presenting Christ to you, and Christ is facing outwards. The whole thing basically it invites participation. It invites interaction with the one who is represented. It invites interaction with Christ, even with Mary. But that's how I think we ought to interpret this. It has some of the features of portraiture, as scholars of art call it. It has some of the features of portraiture that are a hallmark of venerated images. So you'll hear scholars like Robin Jensen basically saying that, look, as soon as Christians had portraits, they were venerated. It's part of the definition of portraiture that it be venerated. Why do people make portraits? Why do they make these outward facing images that has like a person's face facing towards you? The reason for ancient people, setting aside for a moment exactly what modern people do with their portraits, the reason for ancient people was basically like you interact with the person who's depicted. It's often a departed loved one or someone who lives far away or whatever it is, or a character from, ages past, but it's for interaction with the one who is depicted. And Jensen has a beautiful passage in her book, From Idols to Icons, where she talks about how people, they address the one who is depicted. And I think that's even the case with portraits in the modern age. I think people still do this with their loved ones. When they see a picture of them, they'll still talk to them. They don't necessarily believe that the loved one is hearing a prayer or something, but it's a way of focusing an address to the person. And look, Byzantine iconography, the Hodegetria, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, she who points the way, Mary presenting Christ to us.
Mm-hmm.
There's some striking similarity to Mary presenting Christ, again, outward facing infant Christ to us, that we see in the catacombs of Priscilla.
Yeah,
So,
and of course, this icon image, it just spreads around the world in all sorts of different ways. And I was just talking about this earlier today, where this really derives from the Gospel of Matthew, where the wise men come to adore the King, and he's sitting on the lap of our Holy Theotokos Mary, where she is functioning like the throne. You know,
yes.
which the Baptist pastor was saying as a negative thing, uh, as if the throne takes away from the king, but really, when you have the right understanding, she's presenting the king to us, pointing the king to the king. So it's
Yep.
it's very Christ centered, if you
Yeah,
will.
it is. It is. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, it is. Um, yeah. Yeah. All right. So that was the end of my images that I set out there for Gavin. And so now I'm going to go over his response to me. So, all right.
Drum roll.
So I'm not sure if I'm going to read through all of this, but essentially what Gavin did is he really focused on icon veneration. Now, he talks about the fact that some of my examples don't seem to work. He talks about his repeated refrain of decorative, commemorative, didactic. Um, he talked about one of the scholars that I like, Robin Jensen, who I just mentioned, um, and how she doesn't think venerated images would date back to the apostolic age or whatever. And he talks about how Second Nicaea does a lot more than just acknowledge images. And then he links to his reply that he did to myself and Sarah from about a year and a half ago. Um, so I read I read this tweet, and I thought about it for a while because everything that he said, I was like, I could pick at that a little bit. I don't think he's got Jensen quite right there. I don't think he's got the pre-Nicene categories quite right there. I could quote some scholars that would disagree with him on that. I don't think he's got Second Nicaea quite right there either. But I actually think that the best response, the first response that he deserves. And again, I say this with I I give this response only because I know Gavin is also an office aficionado, and because he likes goofy images on thumbnails on videos and stuff like that. But here's my reply. Here's my reply. Dude, this is a Wendy's restaurant. So when I read his response to me, I did not see how it was a response. I did not see how it was a response. So let me lay this out in a little more detail. The original post made by Gavin, it was about what the church looked like. His reply showed that he was talking about its appearance. He was not exactly focused on doctrine, certainly not exclusively. He gave pride of place to the question of appearance when he was talking about, your later mosaics and stuff like that. So my response, it pointed out these 12 examples from before 325 AD. So like pre-Nicene here. And they all show what I would consider to be surprising continuity with Orthodox Christian churches today. The difference, I mean, it's basically a difference of like, well, the church didn't have as much wealth back then. That seems to be kind of what it is. Or the church wasn't, it hadn't kind of shifted its art to address certain doctrinal controversies as they came up later on. In other words, upholding the same content all along, as opposed to kind of development or an accretion or something like that. That's the difference that I see. The actual structures themselves, the architectural features like the chiborum, vaults, four-cornered earth beneath, the altar or baptismal font as a kind of meeting point of heaven and earth, the sacred objects that are on the altar, sacred vessels, sacred lamps, veils, and the images, the iconography. It all seems to be basically of the same life. It seems to come from the same place. Seems to come from the same heart. The difference really just seems to be like, well, they didn't have as much resources back then. It seems to be basically very much one single cloth all the way through. It's not discontinuity. It's not rupture that we see. It's amazing continuity.
Yeah, yeah, and how I would put it is like this is not like an art museum like history lesson on how we preserved art in the Orthodox Church. This is comes to the heart of worship. Like so when we talk about like there being continuity between the early church and today, the heart of that is worship. And I do strongly believe that Orthodoxy has preserved the ancient church's mode, expression, liturgical rhythm. I mean, sacraments, minor orders, major orders. You can just go all over the place. It has preserved with the greatest continuity how we worship God. And that's the most important matter. I mean, um, we can talk about all these doctrines all day and have all these debates, but how we worship is the heart of it. And to me, that really gets to the heart of it. I mean, I was talking about this with Alex the other day, but like when I think of an ecosystem, like how you go into a forest, um, if you go into a well-maintained, very healthy forest, yeah, it's gonna look different 100 years later or 200 years later. But if you went into this forest and then 100 years later you went into it and you saw some changes, but overall you're like, this is the same ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the same wildlife, it's the same plant life, and they're all interacting in the same kind of way, like a rainforest, if you will.
Yeah.
That's continuity. Yeah, there's change. But then if you were to go to the same forest and then it's turned into a desert, you would say, "Oh, there's been massive
Yeah.
change." Right? So it's like, well, yeah, we've all experienced change. true, but we're actually saying that our ecosystem is the
Yeah.
same.
Yep.
Is
Yep.
that a helpful analogy?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
We're
And
not a desert, we're not something drastically different, and when we view kind of Protestantism like what it is today in 2025, it's like, yeah, we think this is a big change, on how worship is conducted.
there's a rupture in terms of appearance. I think there's no question. Like, there's more of a rupture in terms of appearances pre-Nicene, post-Nicene up to the Reformation, post-Reformation, and especially the more low church manifestations of Protestantism. Rupture, yeah. And so my response is that his reply, it seems to concede the obvious fact that these are substantial and important similarities in appearance between the pre-Nicene and later church. Um, I think that starting to focus on the veneration aspect of it, um, I did talk about it a little bit, but it's not really getting to the main, like, what the main thrust of what I was saying, which was in response to him saying the church didn't look like the Orthodox Church in the
Yeah,
pre.
we're staying with big picture. We're not just gonna, like, pivot to, like, some other topic and only focus on that. Those always have their place, though, like, if you wanna debate relic veneration, or if you wanna debate icon veneration, or you wanna debate minor orders,
Yeah,
you know? Um, you could have that a healthy debate with that even in the Catholic world since some of that got overhauled in the '60s to '70s, like, to what extent are they important or apostolic, or fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays, or praying East at Orientum. All these things can be discussed, but they are preserved. I like this book. These are the ancient prayers and hymns of the Church of Jerusalem, and Shoemaker dates many of them to like the mid 300s, anywhere between 350, 400s. Though some of them are later, like the praises of the Theotokos, some of those are a little bit later. Um, but I mean, the Theotokos in those hymns are she's even depicted as a burning bush,
mm, yeah,
which we see as an icon. It's a very popular icon.
yeah,
But I was surprised when I read this. I was like, "Wow." At the Church of Jerusalem where the resurrection happened, they had hymns talking about the Theotokos as the burning bush.
right,
And to me, that was like, wow, that's some continuity there. Like
yeah,
how the church was worshiping in Jerusalem at the very site where Christ was raised back to life looks and sounds very orthodox. Just you can get this book actually for free. You can read the digital copies. It's called The First Christian Hymnal, The Songs of the Ancient Jerusalem Church by Dr. Stephen Shoemaker. It's all free. You can download each little section. I bought it because I like to carry it with my other
yeah,
prayer books and because it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
they're very rich prayers.
That's awesome. You should put me in touch with the link to that after this. That'd be really good to
Yeah,
have.
I'll put it in this video. I'll put the links where people can read all this stuff for free because it's now he kind of made it all like open source, and the book is expensive. It's like $50, but
Yeah.
makes a good Christmas present for somebody. By the way, uh, yes, yes,
So I think maybe we could talk about some brief replies to maybe objections someone might have to to what I'm saying. One objection is, well, what matters is not external forms, but what you believe. And I think that for the person that goes there, for the person that says that, in favor of Protestantism, I think it's kind of assuming what needs to be proved. So I'll just leave it at that for that one. The second one, you could say, well, maybe the meaning of all of these images and architectural features and sacred objects, maybe it was all like, maybe it meant something really different from what you mean. I think that the more you look into this, the more you just see it reinforced that that's not the case. So, I mean, there's stuff that I didn't bring up about, as far back as Saint Jerome, the veneration of chalices. Like, he talks about the veneration of chalices. He talks about the veneration of altars. You see in Origin, him talking about the veneration of altars in church buildings. Yeah, that's not different. That's not different. That's pointing to continuity. There's also, I don't think it's possible, really, for with so much continuity of form, for there to be a major discontinuity of meaning. Like, if it was one or two things that were a little different, I would be like, oh, maybe, if there was a lot of difference in appearance, then I would say, okay, I understand. Or if you wanted to say maybe there's a slight difference in meaning here and there to these same appearances, okay. But the idea that it would be like radically discontinuous, I don't buy it.
right.
Um, and then a third response that you could give, is you could say that There's these early Christian texts that are aniconic and that seem to reject this kind of material culture. You could point to Minucius Felix saying Christians don't have temples, altars, or images, and Origen saying something similar in Contra Celsus. The problem is that when you really start to dig into the actual like Latin words behind Minucius Felix when he says that, or the Greek behind Origen, what you start to uncover is that there's very specific kinds of things that are being referred to. When he says no temples, altars, or images, he's actually not rejecting the idea of church buildings, altars, or even iconography. Temple has a very specific meaning. It's the house of an idol, which is the body of a god. And in a temple, you offer blood animal sacrifices. That's the basic Greek understanding from Herodotus onward of that trio: temples, altars, and images. Minucius Felix is not talking about the kinds of things that Christians do in their sacred spaces, the kinds of objects Christians would have. The images that are mentioned there, it's simulacra, which is better, probably more easily translated statues. And he says no noteworthy images. Why they have no temples, no altars, no noteworthy images. What he's actually criticizing is not, it's not saying that there isn't Christian material culture. The enemy of Christianity who's laying this charge against Christians, why don't they have this stuff? It's not saying that they don't have material culture. It's saying they don't have the specific, grand, massive, famous type material culture that the Romans did. And the word for altar that's used there, it's aras and not altaris. Aras, that's talking about a big, huge structure that you haul a bull onto and sacrifice it. There are Latin Christian texts that from that period, though, that use the word altaris, which is a smaller, more like domestic type cultic structure, to describe what Christians offer the Eucharist on. So the more you dig into the quotes, the less and less it looks aniconic. The more it just looks like, oh yeah, they just reject pagan material culture. And I've brought up several scholars already. So the fourth objection would be, oh, scholars don't agree with this. I've given some paraphrases and quotes from scholars already that indicate that that's not the case. There's lots of scholars that think that the pre-Nicene Christian images functioned like windows to heaven. There's lots of scholars of early Christian material culture that think that Christians had an understanding of sacred materiality, that their altars were viewed as consecrated things, that their buildings were viewed as symbols. And the more you dig into patristic quotes, the harder it becomes to sustain these kinds of things. There is actually not a disagreement between like the material remains and the quotes from these early fathers and early writers. It's actually a lot of harmony. So I'll just end it there on that. And all right, Gavin, if you ever see this, what do you think?
Yes, yes. I mean, even the example that I think you give in your book of in the catacombs, there's the image of the three youths in the fire in the catacombs, and then you can match that with Saint Hippolytus having a whole petition towards the three holy
Yes.
youths, asking for their prayers so that he can become, he can see the beauty of the angel who descended with them, which would be Christ. So may the prayer, the hymn, of course, there's a popular hymn of the three youths in
Yep.
the liturgy of the church. And so I love that quote because not only is it Christ centered, lead me to Christ through your prayers, through your petitions. So it's not, there's no false dichotomy. There's no, saints versus Christ going on there. Um, but you also see the petition being matched with the icon in the catacombs.
There's a lot more that can be said about that specific point, and I'm gonna try and like stop myself because it's so late at night. But that match, that kind of isomorphism or similarity of form between the prayers and between the images, that's something that a lot of scholars talk about. It indicates that the image was used in a devotional way, that it functioned for prayer. And I'll just give one last little phrase from a scholar. Those images of like the three holy youths in the fiery furnace, of Daniel in the lion's den, of Jonah coming out of the mouth of the sea monster in the catacombs, those images of salvation, those salvation iconography, portraying them all praying towards Christ as good shepherd. In the words of Alan Faber, these are a visual litany. It's a visual litany. It's different ways of addressing Christ in prayer, tapping into the images that are there, tapping into Daniel. Save me as you saved Daniel from the lion's den. Save me as you saved the three holy youths from the fiery furnace. Well, if you're doing that in the presence of an image of Christ as Good Shepherd in the apse or the vault of the catacomb, yeah, that's a devotional use of images. That's praying through images. So there you go.
'Cause
That's
they're all going through these trials, like, they're images of trials,
yeah,
and then you're looking to the Savior in the midst of
exactly.
the trial. Is that basically what you're saying?
And there are early Christian prayers that match the iconography of the catacombs specifically,
Yeah.
that match the specific figures that are there. Yeah, yeah. Yep.
So the petitions, the icons, the cosmological space, it's all interwoven.
Yeah.
Pretty cool, pretty cool. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining this very late stream. It's not as late for Michael. I mean, I don't know what time it is for you. It's midnight here. So is it like 9 o'clock for your time in California?
Yep.
Um, but yeah, Amy says, yeah, there's a reason we say come and see, because you have to experience and see the how everything is so integrated, how everything is just interconnected. Uh,
Yep.
that's what we can't lose as Orthodox Christians. I saw it from the outside, and I said that is beautiful, that is, and that's ancient, and I want to be a part of that. So I think many people are discovering this right now in this moment, overcoming these maybe these barriers, both intellectual and emotional. But when they begin to see this interconnectedness, it's kind of a wow moment. So thank you, Michael, for doing that.
I appreciate you having me on, Kyle. There's so much spiritual depth in the Orthodox Church, in its holy images, its sacred architecture, the sacred objects. It's spiritually nourishing. That's what it is. It's spiritually nourishing. It's not. It's not. It's not about like debate points or something like that. You know, um, these things are to be experienced. They're to be beheld, and we see God through them. We experience God through them, and that's Christ incarnating Himself through all these things and presenting Himself to us, saving us. So that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Yeah, and it all points to it all literally points to Christ. Like, it's all embedded into point to Christ. So it's Orthodoxy, the Orthodox Church is the most Christ-centered church you can become a part of. So, no reason to put those against each other. We also need to keep Michael in our prayers. I think Seraphim Hamilton even mentioned Michael passing, who was a good close friend to Seraphim and to others. So keep Michael in your prayers, who passed unexpectedly. I think he's maybe 40, like our age.
Mm.
Um, I also have a good friend, Jeff. Keep him in your prayers. He's passing. I think he's 38. Couple kids. Just saw him last week, and he's very close, if not already there, making his journey home. So keep him, these wonderful Orthodox men, in your prayers. Be greatly appreciated.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining us for tonight's stream, and we'll see you next time. Check out Michael Garton's book, which I'll link in the description below. Also, his course through St. Athanasius College. Definitely take that course. It's still available, and it definitely blesses him, so he can keep writing books and keep making awesome courses. You can also find my course, Patristic Wardrobe, that's on there that I did, which was a lot of fun. And actually, the very first session of that is kind of like C.S. Lewis and St. Dionysius, which is his feast day today. Um,
Oh,
and yeah, so St. Dionysius and C.S. Lewis and the hierarchy and all that kind of thing. So it's pretty cool. First session going on there with cosmology and Lewis's worldview. All right, guys, we'll see y'all next time. Take care.